If your engine's overheating, you might have a problem with your water pump. This is Jake from 80/20 Media. Today we're going to be talking about diagnosing water pump failure as well as the signs and symptoms that are associated with it. Water pumps are responsible for circulating coolant throughout the engine to help keep the engine cool so that it doesn't get beyond its operating temperatures. When an engine gets too hot and starts overheating, it can lead to a number of serious and potentially catastrophic engine issues, such as issues to the internal components like the rods and pistons, which can ultimately lead to complete engine failure. Therefore, making sure your cooling system is operating properly is extremely important for maintaining engine reliability. Water pumps are a common maintenance item. They do tend to fail around every 150,000 miles or so. Now, this varies widely depending on what engine you have, whether you have a mechanical or an electronic water pump, but they are things that fail. So what we're going to talk about today is signs and symptoms of failure to help you prevent experiencing water pump failure and the overheating that it can cause. So first off, just briefly, there are two different types of water pumps. You have mechanical water pumps, which are driven by your timing belt, and then you have electronic ones, which are electronically controlled. There are pros and cons to both of them. Mechanical pumps tend to be cheaper, they're a lot more reliable, they last longer, but they do have more of a drag on engine performance, and it does take a little bit of horsepower away from the engine since the engine has to power the water pump itself. Furthermore, mechanical pumps don't flow as well at idle because the flow is driven by the spinning of the engine. The faster the engine's going, the more coolant is being flowed through, whereas with electronic water pumps, it's able to flow more coolant through the engine at lower engine speeds to help improve cooling at idle and while your engine's operating at lower RPMs. Mechanical pumps are more likely to slowly fail over time. Electronic pumps do have a tendency to fail almost immediately. However, sometimes still they will exhibit some signs letting you know that they're on their way out the door. We're going to go ahead and now talk about signs and symptoms of water pump failure so that you know what to look out for to make sure your water pump isn't on its way out the door. The first most common symptom is coolant leaking from the water pump weep hole. So water pumps have a lot of internal seals and components in them that can go bad. So located on the water pump is a tiny little hole called a weep hole. And the way that this functions is as an internal seal goes bad, coolant starts seeping past that seal and then it will leak out of the weep hole. So coolant leaking out of the weep hole is a good indication that something internally within the water pump is starting to fail, and therefore the water pump might need to be replaced. Typically it's going to start with very small drips out of the weep hole, but as the seal or interior components start to degrade more, it's going to turn into more of a consistent flow coming out of it, and that's going to let you know that you need to replace your water pump sooner rather than later. In addition to coolant leaking out of the weep hole, the most noticeable other symptom is your engine overheating. When your engine overheats, you might get an engine code for overheating as well. If your water pump is an electronic water pump, you might get an engine code for that as well. But overheating is probably going to be the main sign and symptom you have that you have something wrong with your water pump. Now, there are a ton of other cooling components that can cause overheating, so we're going to talk about diagnosing this later, but overheating is probably the most common thing. Usually if you have overheating and it is a problem with the water pump, you will see something coming out of the weep hole. But we'll get into more of that later. Some other signs or symptoms here are a squeaking or chirping or whining noise coming from the water pump. Sometimes your air conditioning won't get hot if your water pump's not working. And then it is possible, although a little bit less likely, to have steam or smoke coming from your engine bay or from around your radiator as well. So just to recap that, we've got coolant leaks coming out from the weep hole of the water pump. We've got engine overheating, possible engine codes for overheating or for water pump failure. We've got squeaking or weird noises coming from the water pump, your AC not getting hot, and possible steam or smoke coming from your engine bay. So now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of different things that can actually cause your engine to overheat. And so just because it's overheating, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the water pump. To go ahead and diagnose whether it is the water pump or not, we've got a couple step-by-step instructions here that you can follow to go ahead and help diagnose what the exact problem might be. So the first step is to check for any possible engine lights. Get a code reader and check for any potential engine codes might help lead you in the direction of what could possibly be wrong, and so that's always a great place to start to help narrow down the list. However, if you don't have any lights or any codes, then the next thing that you're going to want to do is check your coolant levels. If you have low coolant levels, we're going to want to go ahead and figure out where the coolant leak is that's causing those low coolant levels. And so from there, you're going to want to locate your water pump and follow all of the coolant hoses around it to see if you see a leak coming out of any of the coolant hoses. If the leak isn't coming from coolant hoses, then it's very possible that a leak is coming from the weep hole on the water pump. So as a third step, we're going to want to go ahead and check the water pump, see if you can see the weep hole or see any visible signs of coolant leak coming from around the water pump. Now, if you don't see any coolant leaks, if your coolant levels are still high enough, then it is possible that we have a non-water pump related issue. From here, you're going to want to go ahead and check and make sure that the electric fan on the vehicle is working, because a bad electric fan is also a very common cause of your engine overheating. Now, if your fan's working as well, the next thing that you're going to want to check is whether the car is actually flowing coolant or not. What you can do is put your hand around a coolant hose and feel for coolant flow. When an engine is cold and is just started, you're not going to feel any coolant flow because the engine restricts coolant to help get the engine up to operating temperature right when it's first started cold. Once the engine gets up warm into operating temperature, you should start to feel coolant being circulated through those hoses, and they should feel warm as well. That's one of the easiest ways to tell and make sure you actually have coolant flowing through the system, because if you don't have coolant flowing through the system, then you probably have an issue with your thermostat. Now, if you don't have an issue with the thermostat or your electric fan, your problem is likely going to be with the water pump. Again, you should almost always see something coming out of the weep hole. So those are the main things to look for when trying to diagnose whether your issues with your water pump or with something else. It's first to inspect for coolant leaks, check the water pump to see for any leaks there, make sure your fan's working, and make sure your engine's actually flowing coolant. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you appreciate this content, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for our future content.